What's going on, Jets fans? It's your boy DT back. Quick update video. Wanted to talk about some things floating around today regarding the trade deadline and how I believe Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey should go about handling their first trade deadline situation. Obviously, the team sits at 0-5, not exactly how anybody wanted to start this season. We would have hoped for any wins at this point, or even a competitive loss, which it seems like we only have one of. And I'm not the moral victory type, but at least show some life. And in the last 4 games, it seems like they have just not done that, at least to the brand or standard that Aaron Glenn speaks about weekly at the press conference. So just a huge disconnect of where the team is right now, where we mostly expected them to be. So unfortunately, heading into this week 6 matchup against the Denver Broncos that is taking place in London, we have to talk about the trade deadline. Vastly approaching. It's after week 9, I believe, which is the Jets bye week. So they have the week 8 game against the Cincinnati Bengals, who are now going to be quarterbacked by Jets legend Joe Flacco. And then they have a whole bye week and then 2 extra days till that Tuesday trade deadline. So the Jets will have a good 10 days not doing, exactly football related things. It's the bye week. And depending on how Aaron Glenn chooses to do the bye week, obviously a lot of players are going to have some days off. And that's going to really give Glenn and Mougey some time to evaluate this roster. And I'm looking at it. I see 3 names, one that was used in the article I'm about to show on the screen here, and then 2 more that have been speculated already in trades that seem like the more obvious candidates. And I'm just going to go through my starting point on what it would take to even entertain a trade if I were Darren Mougey and Aaron Glenn. So the first report comes from Ralph Vacciano of Fox Sports, and he was told by a league executive multiple NFL sources predicted the 0-4 Saints, the 0-4 Jets, and the 1-3 Cleveland Browns. Obviously, this was written before the Week 5 slate. Those 3 teams will be the teams most willing to ship out players between now and the deadline on November 4th, and each team has some interesting pieces that could attract interest to some of the contenders around the league. They go in to talk about how Cleveland is in a full reboot, and it says, quote, and the Jets are loaded with too many of ex-general manager Joe Douglas's players. New general manager Darren Mougey and coach Aaron Glenn are going to want to purge that organization and rebuild it with their guys. They look like a mess right now, so I think they'd be opening to trading just about anybody. So you couple that report with this tweet here from Evan Cohen of ESPN, who right after the Joe Flacco trade between the Bengals and the Browns earlier today, Evan Cohen says, at Adam Schefter said with us today on Unsportsmanlike ESPN, that he expects that each Monday and Tuesday until the trade deadline, we are likely to see deals adding up to around 10 to 12 before the November 4th deadline. How many of those 10 to 12 trades are going to involve Jets? And I understand a lot of people will say we're shipping out players. And yes, we're going to talk about 3 guys that we could potentially receive calls about, or Darren Mougey could potentially receive calls about and have to make decisions on their future with the team and what approach they're going to take with these 3 players specifically. If it's that many trades, I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets poke around at some Jarvis Brownlee type trades or Jawan Briggs type trades, guys who are under 25 years old with 2 or more years of contractual obligation that they feel like they can mold and fit into their scheme and rebuild with guys that way instead of the older veteran spending a ton of free agent dollars route. So the 3 guys that I'm looking at from the New York Jets perspective are running back Breece Hall, offensive lineman Elijah Vera Tucker, and defensive tackle Quinnen Williams. So Breece Hall, first and foremost, I don't personally want to trade him. I don't think the team should trade him because stylistically, you are a run-heavy team. You're depleting a room that is already hurt with Braylon Allen on the IR for 8 to 12 weeks. We might not see him for the rest of the season. There's only 12 weeks left in the season. And if Braylon Allen even comes to the middle of that timeline, he's only back for 2 more games. If he extends to the very back end of that timeline, he's probably not playing again for the Jets this season. So do you want to deplete your running back room even more by getting rid of a Breece Hall, your obviously most talented player? Outside of Garrett Wilson, he is your best player on offense. Obviously, the offensive line, individually, they look good at times as well. But Breece Hall is easily your second best and at times your first best player on the offense. So it's going to be very difficult to try to trade him from a talent standpoint. But obviously, there are teams out there right now. I look at maybe the Kansas City Chiefs. If they offered you a 4 and a 5, does that start the conversation? I think I would need a little bit more for Breece Hall. Two fours, I think, is probably the absolute minimum for me to even entertain trading Breece Hall, because then you're looking at picks in that top 110 to 140 range in the draft, obviously, depending on where that team finishes. But you can kind of mitigate the talent lost with Breece Hall with a 4th round rookie running back, right? I feel like that's more feasible than trying to do it with a 5th rounder even. So I would say 2 4s is like the absolute minimum, but I really wouldn't accept much less than the value of a 3rd round pick for Breece Hall. And it probably have to be even a top end 3rd round pick, like a top half of the 3rd round. So even then you're talking about a top 70 selection, right? AZ Thomas was picked 75, and we were picking kind of in the middle of that 3rd round there. So I would say a top 70, top 75 pick value-wise for Breece Hall is where I would start that conversation. But it's no secret that there are teams out there that are hurting at running back that could be viewing themselves as playoff contenders. And right now the Jets just simply aren't that. So could Breece Hall be effective on an offense that looks to have a future past, early January? So Breece is the first one. I would personally be against it, but I can't argue if they do decide to do that. Obviously, he had the fumble in Sunday night's game against the Cowboys that cost them potentially points on that 3rd drive offensively, but it feels like he's been putting the ball on the turf quite a bit this season. And obviously the running lanes aren't always, his fault, but there are some vision issues that he's running into the back of his own offensive lineman or Andrew Beck on the lead block. So not the greatest season from Breece Hall, but still very explosive. Obviously he's not hitting those home runs, but he had 9 runs of 10 or more yards on 1st down alone in that Cowboys game. So they were really utilizing him as that drive starter on 1st down. So there is certainly a role here for Breece Hall if he stays, but obviously I can't fault them for trying to gather assets to try to find a replacement for him or other positions in next offseason. The next guy, Elijah Vera Tucker, obviously he's injured right now. I'm not quite sure what the exact stipulations are surrounding trading a injured player. I know it happened. Obviously, we traded for Jarvis Brownlee Jr. This might be a little bit different because he is on injured reserve. But for AVT, I said a couple day 3 assets. Now, that could be 2 5ths, a 5th and a 6th. Is that enough? I don't know. For most fans, they probably would say no because they think AVT is our best offensive lineman or was our best offensive lineman when healthy, especially coming into this season. So do you consider a potential 1-year prove-it deal with like the Andre Sisco kind of contract where it's 1 year, 8 to 10 million based on whatever the market fluctuates at, and you just hope that he can stay healthy in that final year, or you cut ties going into 2027? I think that depends more how they view this offensive line, because Joe Tippmann has been playing, mostly well at right guard, and Josh Myers has his warts as a center. But perhaps the cost of a 1-year prove-it deal with AVT and going back to, hoping that he stays healthy and moving Tippmann back to center, is that more or less efficient than trying to just draft a day 2 or day 3 center in the draft outright and have him compete or be the starter in his rookie year? So that's kind of the scale balancing of what do they prefer is the most efficient plan for offensive line. AVT, I wouldn't have minded them bringing him back, but I feel like the way that Joe Tippmann is playing at guard, now you got to shift your priorities to re-signing John Simpson, maybe to a 2-year deal. even a 1-year deal for John Simpson just to avoid him hitting free agency would be okay with me. And then go allocate a draft pick to center and keep Tippmann at right guard because I think he's doing a fine job there. And then the final guy, Quinnen Williams, longest tenured Jet, a guy that I'll go to bat for just about every single game. I understand his pass rush production is not there, but his run stuffing ability this year has increased to a level we haven't really seen before. He's giving basically, the most effort on every rep that I've seen him play, for the most part, obviously relative to his peers on the defensive line. I think he is by far the best one. So it would be a tough sell, not just to the fan base, but to the locker room. If you get rid of a guy like Quinnen Williams, you're really accepting the rebuild fully. You can get away with trading a guy like Breece Hall or AVT, who hasn't really, obviously been around the team since the startup of week 1's game prep. But Quinnen Williams is a guy that, obviously, I said he's been here the longest, and he was very against a rebuild, very, public about that when they got rid of Rodgers or made the decision to get rid of Rodgers in the offseason. So Quinnen Williams, to me, is a hard sell to try to trade. Obviously, his package of return assets would be the most out of the three guys here. I'm asking for at least a first-round pick minimum for Quinnen Williams because you have to assume it's going to a team that is going to be fighting for the playoffs or already in playoff contention. So you're talking about a late 30 or late 20s, maybe early 30s pick in the first round. So it's really an early second-round pick value-wise. So I'm asking at least for a day 3 asset and or a young player in those under 25, 2 years of contractual obligation stipulations, because if you're going to get rid of Quinnen Williams, you have to bring in a guy, whether it's a defensive end or a defensive tackle, who has some kind of young, moldable upside that you can really sell to this fan base. Like, hey, we got younger with more upside at the position, and we wanted to give, the best chance on a return, but also cut ties with a player that we know the rebuild is going to take longer than he's willing to wait out for. And I'm not saying Quinnen is getting impatient. It seems like players, based on their press conferences, are starting to get a little impatient. Obviously, Breece Hall had the quote about he doesn't have a ton of games left to prove what he can be in this league. But a guy like Quinnen Williams, I personally I can't see trading. It would be too much of a acceptance of defeat type of trade, in my opinion. And those trades usually end with getting a return that's cents on the dollar. So not a huge fan of it, but those are the three guys that I think they can trade. I wouldn't even mind if they added a player at the deadline. Like I said, a young player with a couple years of contractual obligation, give you a guy, maybe a 25-year-old wide receiver that's just buried on somebody's depth chart that really hasn't gotten any exposure this year that you felt good about in the pre-draft process. One of those types of moves I would never mind, whether it's a running back or wide receiver. Tight end, I feel like they're generally okay at. They like the usage of their top 3 guys. And then they still have Smart and Jelani Woods, who are game day inactives. So they're not really adding to that tight end room, if you ask me. Or if you could find a defensive end who's buried on the depth chart somewhere at like 25, 26 years old that has a year or 2 left on his deal, so you don't immediately have to make a contractual decision in the offseason about these guys, I would entertain a trade incoming as well. So as much as I want them to do what's best for the team and get the best return on some of these players, I'm holding tight with Breece and Quinnen. I would entertain AVT. And unless the package blows me away, I would strongly consider just holding on to all your talent, get through this year, and then at the very end of this year, let's evaluate the entire picture, coaching staff and players alike, and then see where we go from there. Because right now, nobody trusts this regime to make any impactful decisions about this team's future, and rightfully so. They really haven't shown you much at 0-5. I personally think that they should get the offseason to do what they want with this organization and mold it the way that they see fit, because that's really the only way these guys have a chance. You can't handcuff them before they really have a chance to implement their roster and scheme, and it's going to take more than just 5 games to do that. So I'm in favor of giving them a chance this offseason, Can't blame anybody who's saying no, they don't deserve the chance to pick the future quarterback of this team, or a top 5 draft pick is way too much for this regime to handle if they show this much incompetence. That's what we got to see over the next 12 games. Competence to the degree where we feel more comfortable allowing these guys to make the decisions moving forward. So just my two cents on the matter. I don't want us to be sellers at the deadline, but if we're 0-8 after that Bengals game, obviously all cards should be on the table and everything should be up for debate, because right now things got to change in a hurry. And until then, I'm DTereman. Like the video, subscribe if you're new, and we will talk to you soon.